and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. We'll continue to use this, as I mentioned, throughout this series. But many of us, when asked or when told you are rich, or maybe met with this thought of, no, I am not. No, I am not. Or met with this feeling of, well, I don't feel rich. Appreciate you telling me, but I don't really feel it a whole lot. But statistically, what we found out last week and what we talked about was many of us are the richest people in the world. From a worldly standpoint, we are the richest people in the world. How do we know that? Well, we found out that if you have one car, not even two. I mean, if you have two, you're in a whole nother bracket, okay? But if you have one car and you have a roof over your head, or your average maybe income, your total income for the year is above $33,000, you're in the top 1% of income earners in the world. Did you know that? You are in the top 1% of income earners in the world. See, for many of us, we struggle to know we are rich because the rich line continues to move. And we talked a little bit about this last week, and what do we mean by that is, for example, what I made back then isn't enough now. And they did a study where if you made $30,000, they asked you, well, what would you need to feel rich? What would you need to be rich? And they said, I need $50,000. And then they asked a group of people that made $50,000, they said, well, what would you need? And they said, I need $100,000. And the line just kept moving, right? As they went through life, the line just kind of kept moving. And so we struggle, not just because the rich line moves, though, but because of what money promises us. See, money promises us what only God can provide. Money promises happiness. And happiness and this feeling that we all enjoy and long for and desire and we all like to rest in, right? We all want to be happy, and the reason we don't know we are rich or feel rich is because money is trying to promise us something that only God can provide, true happiness. We all have things that are no longer things of ours. What do I mean by this? At some point in your life, you probably have gotten a toy, or maybe an item or furniture or whatever it may be, and you were so happy to get it. You were excited to get it. And then the world invented this thing called a yard sale. And guess where that thing that made you the richest person in the world went? On the yard sale, right? It went out to the yard sale. Hey, there's going to be a teen yard sale coming up in June. If you're doing spring training, please donate, okay? Because we'll resell that, all right? I'm not going to lie. But we thought that these things and this money that we'd have would make us the happiest people in the world. And yet, just like the lions, it continued to move, right? It promised us happiness, but God is the only one that provides true happiness. The other thing that money promises is security. Right, we find security in money, this feeling of safety and being secure or content. We feel safe by what we have, right, by these possessions and these savings. And this isn't to say we shouldn't be good stewards, right? If you ask anybody in a financial kind of job or profession, they're going to tell you you should probably have some money saved in your bank account, an emergency fund, if anything, right? You should probably have something. But money may promise us happiness and security, but they are not things that money does not provide us all that. It is only what God can provide us. And if we are not careful, both become things that we are under the influence of. Right? If we're not careful, what we are is that we're under the influence of money because we think it provides us happiness, we think it provides us security, and so then we become the influence of money. And money wants you to believe that it can provide all these things. And by doing so, we will be happy and feel secure. And just like both, we believe that we only need more of it. Right? At the end of the day, because it promises these things, because it promises us happiness and security, we sit there and we begin to be influenced by it. And we say, I need more. Right? I need more of it. And we would be able to solve all the world's problems if we only believe that money, the more money we receive, the more that we have, would solve most of our problems. And if that's you today, if you're here today and you would say, well, if I had more money, it would solve a lot of problems, right? I could pay a lot of bills. I could do all these things. You wouldn't be totally wrong. But if maybe you're here today and you're saying more money would solve all the world's problems, I would argue that maybe we're under the influence of money. And what we need to be is maybe more resting in what God provides and who God is. Money doesn't provide us with happiness and security. God does. That's why Paul said, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, which richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Last week, I asked us to remember being kids. And growing up as kids, we had this idea in our mind of what it looked like to be rich. Right, we had this idea, we had this house, right? Maybe this house that you wanted, it was a mansion, and you wanted this house, or maybe it was the cars, right? You had these cars in mind, or maybe it was a boat, or having a personal driver, or a butler, you name it. We had these things that when we looked out as kids, we said, that's what being rich looked like. That's what it was. For me, I thought being rich was the movie Richie Rich. I don't know if you ever saw that movie, but in case you didn't, it's right here for us. But we had this idea, and I remember seeing this movie, and I thought, that is being rich, okay? If you haven't seen it, it's all about this boy, Richie Rich, and his parents own this. I mean, they're wealthy, and they had someone who was in their company who wasn't the most kind person in the world, and so he kind of coordinates a plane crash that Richie Rich's parents were on. They survive it, but he's trying to take over the business. And Richie's trying to find himself on all his wealth and what he's inherited. And so he's just longing for friends. He meets these friends, and together they kind of find this person, and they get rid of him, and they find out the truth and all this. But what the movie shows you is just how rich Richie was. Right? When you looked at him, he had a roller coaster, he had batting cages, he had a personal butler. They had someone who was like a scientist who just made things and experimented with different things. And they had all this technology at that time, and it was the very definition of what being rich looks like. See, what the world has taught us in this mindset, it's taught us to be really good at having an understanding of what being rich looks like. But the reality is we miss out on what being rich actually is. What do I mean by that? The world has defined us by classes. I hope you didn't know this, but we're all defined from a worldly standpoint by classes. There's the lower class, right? It's those that incomes are below certain thresholds, such as $30,000 or less. And then if you didn't know that there was a lower class, there's a lower middle class. I didn't even know this existed, okay? There's a lower middle class, which incomes between the lower class threshold and certain upper limits, such as $30,000 and $58,000. Then there's the middle class, includes between 2/3 and double the U.S. median household income. Then there's the upper middle class, which is $90,000 to $153,000. And then there's the upper class. Listen, the world says if you make above $153,000 by your combined income, you're rich, right? You're up there, all right? You're up there. You're in the upper class. They just stopped with all the classes out there. But there's 5 classes, right, that we're kind of defined as being rich from a worldly standpoint, or at least defined for us what being rich looks like. We live our lives focused on what it looks like. We miss out on what it is. What we miss out on, the richness found in the fullness of God. See, we aren't meant to focus on what it looks like. We're meant to be rich by who we are. And who we are is what we believe and are convinced of who God is. Who we are is our belief about who God is. And you and I, folks, we're rich. We're rich, and it has nothing to do with what we have, has nothing to do with all these things or what it looks like. You and I are rich simply because of who God is. Because God is rich. Because God is a holy God, and He is holy forever. We are rich because of who God is. Some of you are saying, that's great. Congratulations. We're still struggling with this idea of being rich, right? And we struggle with being rich because we let the world tell us what it looks like. And we care more about what the world says it looks like. And so we forfeit what truly being rich is. That's why Paul said in 1 Timothy, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. See, it's not a matter of if you are rich, because we are rich, and I hope you hear that. It's a matter of, are we being good at being rich and taking hold of the life that is truly life? Did you know God called us to something so much more? He's called you and I to something so much more. And He's called us to take hold of this life that is truly life. So how do we experience life to the fullest? How do we become good at being rich? See, life to the fullest is taking hold of being rich in what matters, being rich givers. We got to begin by being rich givers. Some of you saw this series and you immediately thought again that the pastor was going to ask you to tithe. Well, we know what this is about. Get ready, all right? We know what this is about. This is what it looks like, okay? This is what it is. And some of you remember last week that I got up here and I said, I don't care if you tithe. And the board emailed me after the church service and said, you're on thin ice. No, I'm kidding. Nobody emailed me that. Nobody emailed me that. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Total joke. Total joke. But I did say, I don't care if you tithe here or not. And I stand by that. I stand by that. I don't care if you tithe here. I don't want to tell you we are called to be rich givers because the church needs your money. Obviously, your giving impacts our ministries, but that is not why I'm saying you should be generous givers. I want us to be generous givers because I want to experience the fullness of life that God has created you and I to live. So I want to be very clear. I don't want us to give because you're told to. I don't want us to give because the church needs your money. No, we don't give because of any of that. We give because we are rich and we embrace this calling to be rich givers. I don't know if this is part one of a part two. I'm not sure where next week's going. I changed this week up a little bit. But I mentioned that last week we struggle with being rich because we don't know what it looks like. We don't know that we are rich, and we struggle because we don't know what being rich is. And Paul says it's not being arrogant or boastful or consuming all these things or finding security and happiness in all these things. No, the life that is truly life is rich because we have surrendered ourselves at being rich in what matters most. We've surrendered ourselves to become rich givers. This goes beyond money. I tell you that because it goes beyond money. I don't want to be rich givers. I want to be rich givers, and that may mean with money, right? That may mean that God's calling you to do that. That's great. But I believe it goes beyond that because being rich givers goes beyond money. It is not also being rich in giving, but being rich in good deeds. It's being rich in good deeds. We are rich this morning far beyond what our pocketbooks say, far beyond the things that makes it look like we are rich. That's why Paul was saying in verse 18, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. See, if we want to become good at being rich, we have to learn how to be good givers. We have to be rich in good deeds. And there's two things that help us, I think, with this morning. The first one is we give strategically. We have to become good at giving strategically. And what do I mean by that? I mean that we have to be good at going the extra mile. See, there's this passage in Matthew chapter 5, verse 41 through 42, and it says this, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. In case you didn't know, it was custom at that time for Roman soldiers to come up and ask you to carry their gear and to carry their armor and to carry all these things. And the law said that you would have to carry it for 1 mile. Now, I'm trying to pick back up exercise. And when I think about running a mile, it's painful, okay? I can't imagine carrying the armor and the weight of a Roman soldier for a mile with some sandals and dirt roads and all these different things. But that's what this passage was saying. Go the extra mile. See, Jesus is talking in Matthew 5, and he's telling the crowd and the disciples this great Sermon on the Mount. He talks to them about loving their enemies, being the salt and light, oaths and murder and divorce and so on. And then he gets to this passage where he says, it's an eye for an eye. You've heard this, right? You've heard that it's an eye for an eye and it's a tooth for a tooth. But then Jesus looks at them and he looks at us and he says, truly I tell you, you're rich. Don't forget something. Don't forget it. Hang on a minute. You are rich. And because you're rich, give generously with good deeds. Give strategically. Go the extra mile. Because giving has nothing to do with whether someone else deserves it or not. Did you know that? Giving has nothing to do with whether someone else deserves it or not. I stand here today with the honor to preach, not because I have anything, not because of anything I have done, but because Jesus went the extra mile for me. I didn't earn it. I didn't deserve it. I simply embraced the strategic generosity of God, who was willing to send his Son to die on the cross for you and I. A God that through Jesus and through the Holy Spirit goes the extra mile. The second thing we can do to be good at giving and be good, be rich in good deeds is we give sacrificially. See, we are rich in good deeds not by what it looks like. We talked about this earlier, and it's kind of been the theme this morning of what it looks like. Maybe you've heard that saying be told to you before about things in your life of what it looks like. And I'm just here to tell you what it looks like doesn't matter when it comes to God. Can I just tell you that? What it looks like doesn't matter when it comes to God. What we are called to do is give what we have. But I want to talk about this idea of what it looks like. One of the best passages you can read in the Bible, we were at M25, a conference not too long ago, and there was a sermon on this whole passage. But one of the best passages you can read in the Bible is Luke 15. If you want to know what the Bible is all about, read Luke 15, and you're going to see some parables in there that's probably going to change your life. And it's some parables about a lost sheep and how Jesus leaves the 99 to go after the one. And then there's this parable about the lost coin and how don't you flip everything over in your house and do all that you can to find this lost coin? And then you get to this parable about this lost son. You know it. You know Luke 15, the prodigal son. And I love this passage because what it looked like was all these things are lost. What it looked like is they're gone. They're done. They're lost. And I'm so glad we live our lives not based on what it looks like, but what it is. The prodigal son asked his father for all his money. He said, give me my inheritance. I want to go. I want to leave. And so he goes and he realizes what being rich is all about in that moment. He squanders it all, right? And he's finding himself just in the bottom of the bottom. And what it looks like isn't good, right? It's not good for him. Look at your life is not going the way you desired it to go. And so he comes back home. And what did the father do? He continued to give generously. He continued to give sacrificially. He gave him a ring. He gave him clothes to wear. He provided a feast and the best calf. It wasn't a matter of what it looked like when it comes to God. For 3 days, Jesus was dead. The world thought the last words of Jesus meant it was over. When Jesus said it was finished, the world thought this meant this is the end. This is it. This is what it looks like, right? He's dead. He's physically dead. We saw it. We were there. We witnessed it. Yet you and I know how the story goes. That's not true. See, during those 3 days, the world didn't feel all that rich, did they? They didn't look all that rich. But on the third day, when Jesus rose from the grave, you and I and the rest of the world became the richest people on earth. You and I are rich. You are rich. And it has nothing to do with what it looks like and everything to do with who God is. I often get asked, how you doing? How are things going? And I reply with the words, living the dream. I'm living the dream. I say it all the time. And some might be thinking, you can't possibly be living the dream all the time. Look, I want to tell you this morning that on my best days or my worst days, God has blessed me with more than I ever need. God has blessed me with Jesus. Therefore, I am rich. It doesn't matter what class I'm in, what house I have, car I drive. It doesn't matter if I feel rich or I don't feel rich. It doesn't matter what it looks like. The cross tells me I am rich. So we give what we have. Giving sacrificially is hard because we are met with fears and pressures, and we are met with thoughts about what giving looks like. We're met with thoughts like, but I don't have much. Can I remind you of a few passages in the Bible? One of my favorite. Boy with some fish and some bread. The crowds were coming, and the disciples were like, Lord, listen, we believe in who you are, but this ain't adding up. My math ain't mathing. All right, there's a lot of people, and we got nothing to feed them with. And they hungry. And so one of them even was like, hey, send them away. Tell them to go eat and come back, you know? And Jesus like, no. Gather what you can. So they find this boy with some fish and some bread in John 6, and we know how the story is. They feed thousands of people. Or what about this woman who washed Jesus' feet with what? Her tears and some perfume and her hair. It says in Luke 7, a sinful woman in the town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. And we're talking about Mary here. And so she brought an alabaster jar of perfume and stood behind Jesus at his feet. What was she doing? She was crying. She began to wash his feet with her tears, and she dried them with her hair, kissing them many times and rubbing them with her perfume. She gave what she had, and maybe what she had in that moment was simply the tears from her crying, but yet we see her as one of the richest people in the world. Or maybe you're met with the thought this morning, I'm not good enough, and what I have isn't good enough. And as a matter of fact, what I have and who I am isn't enough. And to be honest with you, to be a good giver, to be rich at it, I need more. Can I remind you of the Samaritan lady at the well? In John chapter 4, this woman is coming to the well because she's needing more. What is she needing more of? She's needing some water because she is thirsty. And Jesus, throughout that whole passage, he talks to her about a water that lasts forever. And he looks at his disciples and they say, but Lord, when the disciples come later, they look at him and they say, but Lord, you need to eat. And he says, I have food that you know nothing about. And the Samaritan lady, knowing who she is, she's not supposed to be talking to Jesus, and she's had 5 husbands, and Jesus knows this, and he tells her that, and she's like, wait a minute, how did you know that? You must be the Messiah. She goes back to the town where everybody knows her, and they know who she is. She's not, listen, from a worldly standpoint, she wasn't rich. You know what I'm saying? She ain't someone that you looked at and said, that woman's rich. And she goes back to her town, and Scripture tells us she brought the whole town. She said, hey, come over and meet this guy, right? Come over. This is him. He knew everything there was to know about me. This is him. And the world knew in an instance, rich wasn't about what you have or who you are. It's about who Jesus is. The man who was needing help in the pool in John 5. Jesus comes up to him, and he says, hey, do you want to get well? He's like, I'd love to. Do you want to be rich? I'd love to be rich. I got nobody to help me in the pool. Every time I'm supposed to get in, I can't make it. No, everybody jumps in front of me. They all take everything and all this. And Jesus said, gather all your things, get up, and walk out of here. In that moment, that man became the richest man in the world. These people were no way near enough. When you look at them from the ways that we look at what being rich is, they were nowhere near enough. But Jesus gave sacrificially. And being enough and having enough to be good givers and to be rich in good deeds has everything to do with God than it does with you. We don't give because of who we are. We give because of who He is. So when it comes to being rich givers and being rich in good deeds, maybe what we should be more concerned about isn't what it looks like. But maybe we should be more concerned about praising God with the blessings He has provided. I said it last week, and I want to say it again. Every blessing we don't turn back into praise has the potential to turn into pride. If we're not careful, every blessing that God has given us, if we don't turn that back into praise, we have the potential to turn it into pride. Let's be people that praise God because of what only God can provide. Money wants to promise happiness and security, but that is what only God does. Because we are rich, let's give back the praise. The richest we will ever be in life won't be what we store up. Can I just say that? The richest we'll ever be in life won't be what we store up. It won't be this great payday or the richest we'll ever be in life. It won't be when we have received all these things and we've made it. Why? Because the line keeps moving. I'm just going to tell you that. The line keeps moving. But the richest you'll ever be in life is when you give God back what He's blessed you with. When you become rich in good deeds and you become a rich giver because God has given you more than you've ever needed. Being rich isn't a transaction. It's a blessing God has provided. So I want you to know today, church, that you are rich. And it's our job to go tell the world and let the world know that they're rich too. They are rich too. Paul wrote in 1 Timothy not to warn about wealth. He wrote that passage so that we could know about how to be wealthy. He wrote that passage to remind us what God does not want is for those things to have us. He's not saying don't be guilty for being blessed. He's saying, no. Praise God for the ways He has blessed your life. Give God the praise. Give God the glory for the ways that He's blessed your life. But what He's warning us is don't let those things have you. Turn them back into praise. And the best way we can make sure that those things, those money, doesn't have us, it's by being rich givers and being rich in good deeds. The cross tells me I'm rich. So I want you to know you're rich. Go tell the world. Because I believe what the world needs now more than ever is to know they're rich too. And it has nothing to do with the way we define it, but by who God is.